Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be talking about the difference between a healthy BDSM relationship and an abusive BDSM relationship. Now, I know this subject is going to be hard to listen to for some people. I try to go over everything as sensitively as I can, but I know that it can still be triggering for some people, so please keep that in mind while you're watching this video. The reason why I want to go over this topic is because I've noticed in the pet play community and especially in the kitten play community, there tends to be a bit of confusion about what does and doesn't constitute abuse in a BDSM relationship. So, for example, I've seen a lot of posts where people are judging one another's relationships, saying things like, oh, that's so abusive, my dom would never do that to me, or your dom is abusive, he's abusing you, just like using the term I'm not going to say lightly, but they use it pretty frequently. And, I am glad that people are looking out for each other, that they're aware of the signs of abuse, that they are, open to talking about it with each other. But at the same time, a lot of that is coming from the fact that the newer pet players they're new to BDSM. They aren't used to what a BDSM dynamic looks like, and they also aren't usually involved in BDSM in the real world. They haven't had a lot of experience with other dynamics other than their own, and they haven't had a lot of experience in a real life, BDSM lifestyle interacting with other couples, and so they don't really have a frame of reference for what is actually normal and consensual in a BDSM relationship other than what they do themselves. The really, really big thing that makes an abusive relationship different from a healthy relationship is the lack of consent. And I know what you're saying, Amy, duh, of course it's about consent. You mentioned that in like every video you've ever made. Why are you bringing it up now again for the 57th time? Like, I know I talk about consent a lot, and that's because it's really, really, really important, and it is what makes the difference between an abusive and a healthy BDSM relationship. So, for example, if you're in a BDSM relationship and you've negotiated, you have a contract, or you just have a mutual understanding of what each other's preferences and limits are, you're expected to respect those limits. And keep in mind that there are some pretty freaky, kinky people out there in BDSM. That's why it's BDSM. And for some people, their limits are a lot less stringent than others. It doesn't, really matter where their limits are so long as it's being respected by the top or the dom. In a healthy BDSM relationship, a dominant is always mindful of what the limits and preferences are of the submissive. If they were to ever do something that were to violate their limits, they would immediately stop what they were doing as soon as they realized it, whether or not that be on their own or through the submissive communicating to them that they're not okay what's going on, and they would apologize. They would administer aftercare. They would make sure everything was okay, and they would be sure to not do it again at the very least. In an abusive BDSM relationship, a dom is very active in pushing the submissive. While the dominant's role can be to help the submissive grow and become more comfortable with soft limits, that's not always the case. And with hard limits, a dominant should never overstep their bounds and should always make sure to communicate with the sub before actually trying anything that would normally be considered a limit. And when somebody is abusive and when they are pushing limits, they do so repeatedly over and over again despite the submissive protest. Oftentimes the submissive is made to feel that this is somehow normal, that it is a dominant job to push limits like I just talked about, but the way they actually are done are quite different. If you're in a situation where you want your dom to help you grow past your soft limits, you do so at very sort of baby step intervals. You introduce it slowly. You make sure you're always going back and communicating about how you felt about it, just taking your time with it. Whereas an abusive dominant will rush right through all of them and just start doing things that are hard limits right away, and just it can be very upsetting. And of course it is. If your dominant is doing something that you're not consenting to, that is 100% abuse all of the time. And if this repeatedly happens over and over again and they're not being apologetic and they're not administering aftercare, just that is a relationship you need to walk away from. And speaking of aftercare, I would consider not administering aftercare to be a characteristic of an abusive BDSM relationship. If a submissive communicates the fact that they need aftercare at some point to their dominant, it is expected that the dominant give aftercare to them. It is one of their responsibilities as a dominant or as a top. if you have someone who routinely doesn't administer aftercare or never introduces their submissive to it at all, that is considered abusive. Subdrop is a very, very real problem, and especially after long, intense scenes is a requirement unless you want your submissive to actually get physically ill. Another characteristic of an abusive BDSM relationship that isn't present in a healthy BDSM relationship is the control dynamic. Now, this is a bit different because of the fact that power exchange is sort of inherent in most, if not all, BDSM relationships. But the difference is that this kind of behavior is also present in the vanilla world in abusive relationships. I know that some dominants are more controlling than others, and sometimes submissives can want this level of control in their relationship where they are only allowed to interact with the dominant. But typically, if your dominant is trying to keep you from seeing your friends, from interacting with your family, from making new friends, from interacting in the community, be that online or in person, that is considered abusive. One of the very first steps that somebody who is a chronic abuser will do will be to try to cut you off from other people in your life because those other people could help you if you end up in a situation that is actually abusive. Another sign of abuse is how they actually handle the contract. Typically, in a healthy BDSM relationship, a contract should be something that your dominant lets you kind of co-write or at least have some level of input on, where in an abusive BDSM relationship, the dominant will completely author the contract. And while sometimes this does happen where a dominant is the one to write a contract, it should always be that the submissive is allowed to, at least read it and look it over and make some suggestions about it before agreeing to it. This is where the waters get a little bit muddy. There is an idea in BDSM, or a dynamic, I guess, and it's called consensual non-consent. And that's basically the idea that you pre-agree to not agree to something. And this is pretty common in scenes that involve interrogation, play rape, takedown and capture. Some of the more sort of things that are considered extreme or edge play can have an element of consensual non-consent, and that is something that I would never recommend to somebody who's new to BDSM or is in a new BDSM relationship. It is very straining, especially in the submissive, because a lot of times you've also agreed to forego aftercare. But the important part of all of this, and the reason why consensual non-consent is different than abuse, is because the word consent is again still present. You have agreed to give up your ability to agree in the future. And if you are in a consensual non-consent scene or dynamic or relationship or whatever it is, you can revoke it. You can go back and say, you know what? I thought that consensual non-consent was going to be something that I can handle, but I really can't. I want to end this relationship, or I want to change our dynamic, or something. They can bring up that conversation, and then the consensual non-consent is over. Whereas in an abusive relationship, the consensual non-consent never really stops because it's just straight up non-consensual. No matter what the submissive says or does, the dominant somehow either tricks them or guilts them, or just flat out just keeps doing whatever it is that the submissive doesn't want. And that's why it's abuse and not consensual non-consent, because there isn't any consent actually happening ever. Consent is never a topic that gets brought up. And in addition to ignoring things like limits, they of course also ignore safe words and probably don't talk about safe words at all. Again, they treat safe words like something that other people do that is somehow an impure practice in BDSM, that if you're a real submissive or you're a real dom, you don't need safe words because somehow you intrinsically know what your submissive needs at all times, or you're a submissive, so you should just trust your dominant, and your dom continually pushing you, and going past red, going past yellow even is somehow considered like a good thing. Like, I've heard some pretty disturbing conversations. One time when I was at a dungeon, and there were 3 dominants who were all talking with each other, and they all gave one of the dominants a high five because he was telling a story where he pushed his submissive to red. And to me, that was just really disturbing. Like, the whole reason why yellow exists is so you don't get to red, because yellow means slow down, not speed up. And I mean, I don't know the situation. I wasn't there. I didn't see the scene. Maybe she wanted to be pushed to red, but at the same time, the frame of mind where getting to red is seen as the goal, where getting to red is sort of a badge of honor for a dominant, should not be the case. And to just wrap things up, I do want to reiterate that it is really hard to judge a BDSM relationship from the outside unless you're actually part of that relationship yourself. You know, everybody's dynamic is different, everybody's limits are different, and while there are outward signs of abuse, it's really hard to know unless you're actually experiencing it yourself. Really, all I wanted to talk about in this video. I hope you found it helpful. I try my best to kind of go over everything kind of lightly and not offend anybody, but also helpfully, you know, provide information for some people that's useful. So if you did find the information useful, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be doing for my next couple of videos, but I'm sure I'll figure it out. If you have any suggestions, please leave them down below. I also just love reading comments, so please tell me about your day. Tell me what you thought about this video. Tell me any video suggestions that you might have. But until I see you next, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.